like mods. So it's like the regular Hellsplit, I guess. Resident Evil. Okay. RoboCop, I guess. RoboMod. What?
As time ticks by, still I try.
Hellsplit Arena is an absolutely insane game. It's enjoyable, bloody, and just downright visceral. But is it really the best VR combat game, as I've seen some people say? Hellsplit Arena was developed by Deep Type Games and released in September of 2019. Now, at this point, the game was just kind of like slash and stab, you know, as most VR games are when they come out. I shouldn't even really say stab, because stabbing was like virtually impossible until one of the most recent updates. But it has been updated since then. It's pretty much a completely new game. They've added new weapons, they've added like medieval guns, which I think is really cool. They've added things like horses you can ride around, interactions with the environment, just little things that add so much to a VR game. I think Hellsplit Arena was one of, if not the first game, to bring up the concept of medieval zombies, which I actually find really interesting. There's only two other games that I think show medieval zombies, and that is Blight, you've probably seen it, it's the flat screen game, and Grimlord VR, which kinda just looks like a copy of Hellsplit Arena, and I think it probably is. We're not going to talk about Grimlord today, but I feel like I'm probably going to do a video on it at some point. Not sure when. Anyway, now I'm going to get to the highlight of the game, and really the entire game, the combat. Now, as you can see from what I'm doing right now, the combat is really enjoyable, insanely bloody. You can like pop heads open, or just like tear hearts out. I missed. Another great thing about this game's combat is that there's so many weapons. There's maces, swords, daggers, guns, axes. Pretty much any medieval weapon you can think of, there's at least a version of that. Now, if you have not played Hellsplit, you may think that the wide choice of weaponry would make the game too easy, but there's this unlock system where you have to like go down a line and unlock like the worst axe to the best axe. So you're not just given like the best weapon immediately, but also as you progress in the game, as you get better weapons, the enemies get harder. They get so much harder. Now, earlier in the footage, you saw me tearing hearts out, you know, smashing enemies' heads in with my mace super easily, but it does not stay like that for long. You get enemies with armor, you get more ranged enemies, you get larger enemies. It just gets so much harder. Now, in some games, when you reach the later stages of them, they get really hard. They get so hard that it gets kind of frustrating and like not fun to play. And this game is almost that, but I feel like the devs did find a good gray area where later in the game, it's not like too impossible to play, but they did make it sufficiently hard enough. What I mean by this is you won't rage quit when you die. Unless you're in hardcore mode, which I've rage quit quite a few times dying on that one. Now, with how much I've been glazing it in the past 3 minutes, you may think that I think it's the best VR combat game. I think the title of best VR combat game has been going to, and it will always go to, Blade and Sorcery. Now, don't get me wrong, Hellsplit Arena is an absolutely great game, but it is by no means the best VR combat game. And what I feel like holds Hellsplit Arena back is the fact that they tried to make it an actual game. Now, usually, like in my video on Saints and Sinners, I said that's a good thing, but it isn't really here because I'm reluctant to use the term actual game, since it's just waves on waves on waves. You get none of that story or other gameplay elements that you would get with a real game, but you also don't get like the freedom of a sandbox mode that you would get with other VR games like Blade and Sorcery or Bone Lab. Now, 90% of people don't play VR games like they play real games. They just play it for like half an hour to an hour, and they're just looking for half an hour to an hour of fun. Now, this game does offer that, but it's not the most fun a game can be. With things like Bone Lab or Blade Sorcery, as I mentioned earlier, you can spawn what you want and do what you want. And, you know, coming up in Blade Sorcery, you have the option to progress. In Bone Lab, you have the option to progress, but you're not forced into it. Now, since most VR games are made by indie studios, a massive part of the game has to be mods. Now, with Blade Sorcery and Bone Lab, they had mod support from the get-go, because they knew that they couldn't offer a proper amount of content. So, you know, they have to rely on the community, which that's good. It also gives the player base freedom to implement what they want into their own game. Now, Hellsplit Arena only came out with this very recently. So there isn't many mods, and the mods that there are, there's only like 10 or so good ones. With things like, I'm gonna mention this again, sorry, Blade Sorcery and Bone Lab, there's hundreds of good mods you can download that have been there since the beginning. Now, since I'm talking about Bone Lab and Blade Sorcery, I don't want you guys to think that they are the perfect VR games. Bone Lab has its problems, and it actually has a lot of problems, which I will get into probably in a video sometime later. Blade Sorcery is not perfect either. There is really no perfect game. Blade Sorcery is my favorite VR game, but just remember it's not perfect. Now, back to Hellsplit Arena, I think another reason that this game isn't the best is because it gets kind of stale after a while. And you do fight different and harder enemies as you go along, but for 10 levels, you're fighting the same enemy in the same arena. And then, oh, you get transported to another arena. Oh, you're fighting the same 10 enemies in the same arena. Now, as you can see, what's on screen right now is a earn more gold level, I guess, which it gives you like no gold first off, but there's only like 2 of these in every 10 rounds. Now, again, no VR game is perfect. No VR game ever will be perfect, but I feel like there is these little things that every VR game can do to make it better. Do I recommend Hellsplit Arena? 100%. They are still updating it constantly. So in like a year or 2 years time, this video could be completely obsolete. Everything I said in here could be wrong, but who knows? I do definitely recommend checking it out. It's on PSVR and Steam. It is a great game. I post new videos every Saturday or Sunday, whichever I feel like, whatever time I have the video done. So thank you for watching again, and I hope I can see you there next week. Bye. I hoist him by his balls. Did you just trip? Oh, he just tripped on the banana peel. Oh my god. He's tripping on the banana peel. Oh, this game's actually kind of amazing. Come on, come here. Come here. Oh yeah. Oh my god, they do. That is like game of the year. I think it came out like 2 years ago, but it doesn't matter.